The dust swirled across the weathered boardwalk as Wyatt Xanders rode into Tucson, Arizona territory, in the summer of 1878, his shadow stretching long behind him like the past he couldn't outrun. He'd been riding for days, his clothes stiff with sweat and trail dust, his eyes scanning the street with the wariness of a man who expected trouble around every corner. Tucson wasn't where he'd planned to end up, but plans had a way of changing when your name appeared on wanted posters in 3 territories, even if the charges weren't entirely fair. The main street was bustling, despite the afternoon heat. Merchants called out to passers-by, a group of children chased a hoop down the street, and women in high-necked dresses hurried along, shielding themselves from the sun with parasols. Wyatt guided his chestnut stallion, Copper, toward the livery stable at the far end of town, his hand never straying far from the worn handle of his colt. "Need your horse looked after, mister." The liveryman was a grizzled old-timer with a permanent squint from years in the harsh Arizona sun. "I'd appreciate it," Wyatt replied, swinging down from the saddle with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "He's had a long ride. Give him a good rub-down and extra feed if you don't mind." The old man nodded, looking Wyatt over with open curiosity. "Passing through or staying a while? Haven't decided yet." Wyatt handed over a few coins and retrieved his saddlebags. "Well, if you're looking for work, the Circle V ranch just outside town's been hiring. Owner's a widow woman, lost her husband last winter. Been struggling to keep the place running." Wyatt nodded noncommittally. He hadn't come to Tucson looking for work, just a place to lie low until the bounty hunters on his trail found something else to chase. But the prospect of honest work was tempting. It had been too long since he'd had anything resembling a normal life. "Thanks for the information," he said, adjusting his hat before heading toward the hotel across the street. He needed a bath, a shave, and a decent meal before making any decisions. The Tucson Grand Hotel was modest despite its name, but it was clean and quiet. Wyatt paid for 3 nights in advance, using the name William Turner, one of several aliases he'd adopted over the years. The desk clerk barely glanced at him, too busy swatting at flies in the afternoon heat to take much notice of yet another dusty traveler. After washing away the grime of the trail and changing into his least worn shirt, Wyatt made his way to the saloon down the street. His stomach was growling, and a whiskey would help ease the ache in his trail-worn muscles. The Silver Dollar Saloon was doing steady business, though it wasn't crowded. A piano player tinkered out a jaunty tune in the corner, and several card games were in progress. Wyatt found a table with a good view of both the door and the bar and settled in, ordering a whiskey and whatever food was on offer. He was halfway through a surprisingly decent plate of beef stew when the saloon doors swung open, and the room fell oddly quiet. Wyatt looked up, his hand instinctively moving closer to his gun, but it wasn't trouble that had walked in, at least not the kind he'd been expecting. A woman stood in the doorway, dressed in practical riding clothes rather than the frilly dresses of the saloon girls. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a simple knot, and she carried herself with the confident posture of someone who was used to giving orders and having them followed. Even from across the room, Wyatt could see the determined set of her jaw and the flash of intelligence in her eyes as she scanned the saloon. "Miss Lydia," the bartender called out, "what can we do for you today?" "I need to speak with Mr. Peterson," she replied, her voice clear and direct. "Is he here?" A heavy-set man at one of the card tables pushed back his chair. "Right here, Miss Valentin. Something wrong out at the ranch." She crossed to his table, speaking too quietly for Wyatt to hear. Whatever she said caused Peterson to frown and shake his head. The woman's shoulders stiffened, and even from across the room, Wyatt could read her frustration. After another minute of conversation, she nodded curtly and turned to leave. As she passed Wyatt's table, their eyes met briefly. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of pride, determination, and barely concealed worry that struck him. She nodded politely and continued on her way, but something about her lingered in Wyatt's thoughts long after she'd gone. Who was that? He asked the bartender when the man came to refill his whiskey. Lydia Valentin. Owns the Circle V ranch I mentioned earlier. Her husband died last winter. Pneumonia took him fast. She's been trying to run the place herself, but it's been one problem after another. Rustlers hitting her herds, cowhands quitting to find easier work, and now I hear the banks pressuring her about loans her husband took out. Wyatt nodded, thinking of what the liveryman had said about the ranch needing hands. She always come into town alone, the bartender shrugged. She's not one to show weakness or ask for help unless she's desperate. Proud woman. Too proud if you ask me. That ranch is too much for any one person, let alone a woman, no matter how capable. Wyatt finished his meal in thoughtful silence. He'd planned to keep moving after a few days' rest, but something about Lydia Valentin's determined face stayed with him. He'd been running for so long, maybe it was time to stop for a while. The next morning, Wyatt retrieved copper from the livery and asked directions to the Circle V. It was a 5-mile ride from town, the trail winding through stretches of sun-baked desert and scrub, before opening up into grassland that looked surprisingly lush compared to the surrounding terrain. The ranch itself was modest, but well-built, a main house with a wide porch, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals containing horses and cattle. As Wyatt approached, he noticed a woman, the same one he'd seen in the saloon, struggling to repair a section of fence. She was working alone, her movements efficient but showing signs of fatigue. "Morning," Wyatt called out as he approached, not wanting to startle her. "Understand you might be looking for hands." Lydia Valentin straightened, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Up close, her eyes were a clear hazel, her face sun-kissed and framed by wisps of hair that had escaped her practical bun. "I might be," she replied, measuring him with a glance. "Depends on what you can do and how long you're planning to stay." "Name's Wyatt Xanders. I can ride, rope, brand, and break horses. Been working cattle since I was old enough to sit a saddle." She studied him, her expression guarded. "We've had trouble with drifters before. They work a week, collect pay, then disappear when there's real work to be done." "I'm not looking to drift anywhere for a while," Wyatt said. It was true enough, though he couldn't promise how long a while might be. "I'll work honest and hard for fair pay." Lydia considered him for another moment before nodding. "We can try it for a week. I've got 3 other hands left, but I need at least 5 to handle the herd properly. Pay is room, board, and $30 a month." "That'll do," Wyatt agreed, though the pay was less than standard. He suspected she was offering what she could afford. "There's a bunkhouse behind the barn. You can put your gear there. Once you're settled, find Miguel. He's been with the ranch longest, he'll show you what needs doing." Wyatt nodded and turned copper toward the barn, but Lydia's voice stopped him. "Mr. Xanders, I run a respectable operation here. No drinking on the job, no fighting, and no trouble." "Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Miss Valentin," he replied, tipping his hat to her before continuing on. The bunkhouse was simple but clean, with 4 bunks, only 2 of which looked occupied. Wyatt chose an empty one near the door. Old habits of keeping escape routes close died hard, and stowed his gear. After settling copper in the corral with the other horses, he went in search of Miguel. The ranch hand was easy to find, a stocky, middle-aged Mexican man with a weathered face and calloused hands, working in the barn. He greeted Wyatt with cautious friendliness. So you're the new hand. Good. We need the help. Miguel gestured around the barn. Miss Lydia, she tries to do everything herself since Mr. Valentin died, but it's too much. Too much for anyone. How long have you been with the ranch? Wyatt asked, helping Miguel stack hay bales. 15 years. Came with Mr. Valentin when he first bought this land. Was nothing then just dirt and dreams? Miguel's expression grew somber. He was a good man, built everything you see. Miss Lydia, she helped him every step. They were partners in all things. When he died, everyone thought she would sell, but she is stubborn. Says this ranch is her home, and she will not be driven from it. The rest of the day passed in hard, honest work. Wyatt helped repair fencing, move cattle to fresh pasture, and mend tack. By sundown, his muscles were pleasantly sore, and the bunkhouse cot felt like the finest feather bed. The other hands, Miguel, a young half-Apache man named Thomas, and a lanky cowboy called Hank were decent sorts, if somewhat reserved around the newcomer. The days fell into a pattern. Wyatt rose before dawn, worked until dusk, and kept his head down. He saw Lydia frequently, as she managed the ranch operations, but their interactions were brief and businesslike. Still, he found himself noticing things about her: the way she softened when talking to her horses, how she never asked her hands to do anything she wouldn't do herself, the quiet competence with which she handled every crisis. A week passed. Then two. Wyatt stayed on, telling himself it was just until he'd earned enough to move on safely, but knowing there was more to it than that. There was something about the Circle V and its determined owner that made him want to stay, despite the risk. The trouble started 3 weeks after Wyatt's arrival. He was returning from the south pasture when he spotted riders approaching the main house. 3 men, moving with the deliberate slowness that usually meant trouble. Drawing closer, he recognized one as Peterson, the man Lydia had spoken to in the saloon. The others were strangers to him, but their well-cut clothes and the way they carried themselves suggested they weren't ranch hands. Wyatt approached cautiously, dismounting near the porch where Lydia stood facing the men. Her posture was rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. "The terms aren't negotiable, Mrs. Valentin," one of the men was saying. "Mr. Townsend has been more than patient, but the bank requires payment or collateral." "This land is my collateral," Lydia replied, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her stance. "And the herd will bring good money at market next month. I just need more time." "Time isn't something we can offer. Your husband borrowed heavily last year to expand the herd, and with his passing, those debts have come due. Mr. Townsend is willing to accept a portion of your land, the north section, with water rights as payment. That's the best grazing land on the ranch. Without it, the Circle V isn't viable," the banker shrugged. "That's not the bank's concern, Mrs. Valentin. You have 1 week to decide: pay the note in full or sign over the north section. Otherwise, foreclosure proceedings will begin." As the men turned to leave, they noticed Wyatt standing nearby. Peterson nodded in recognition, but the others merely glanced at him dismissively before mounting their horses. When they were gone, Wyatt approached Lydia, who remained on the porch, her gaze fixed on the departing riders. "Problem?" he asked quietly. For a moment he thought she might dismiss him. She was clearly a woman used to handling her troubles alone, but something in her seemed to give way just slightly. "Nothing I can't manage," she said, then sighed. "Though I'm not entirely sure how just yet." I couldn't help overhearing. "They're pressing you on a loan." Lydia hesitated, then nodded. "James, my husband, took out a loan last spring to expand the herd and improve the northern grazing land. He had a 5-year plan to grow the ranch, but then the winter came early and hit hard. We lost cattle, and then—" She swallowed. "And then we lost him. And now they want their money, or the land. The north section has the best water access on the property without it. She shook her head. I have some savings, but nowhere near enough. The cattle would bring a good price if I could get them to market, but that's still weeks away, and the bank won't wait. Wyatt studied her face, seeing the worry she tried so hard to hide. There might be other options. Like what? Borrowing from another bank just to pay this one would only delay the inevitable. What about investors? Someone who might buy in as a partner. Lydia's expression hardened. I've had offers. Peterson is one of them. They all want the same thing to buy in cheap, then push me out entirely. This ranch was James's dream, and we built it together. I won't see it carved up or taken away. Her determination was admirable, but Wyatt could see the reality of her situation. Without help, she would lose everything. And for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, he didn't want to see that happen. I might be able to help, he said carefully. Lydia looked at him, surprised. You've been a good hand, Mr. Xanders, but this isn't your problem. Maybe not. But I've been saving for a while, and I might have enough to cover at least part of what you need. It wasn't entirely a lie. Wyatt did have money, though it had come to him through means he wasn't proud of. The reward from his last job had been substantial, and he'd kept it hidden for emergencies. Suspicion flashed across her face. Why would you do that? You barely know me or this ranch. Consider it an investment. I'm tired of drifting, and this seems like a decent place to put down roots for a while. We could work out terms: a small share of the ranch, or repayment with interest when you sell the cattle. Lydia studied him, clearly torn between pride and practicality. I don't take charity, Mr. Xanders. It's not charity, it's business. Wyatt held her gaze steadily. Think about it. You don't have to decide now. Before she could respond, Miguel approached from the barn, calling out about a problem with one of the horses. Lydia nodded to Wyatt, a mix of gratitude and uncertainty in her eyes, before turning to address the new crisis. That evening in the bunkhouse, the other hands were unusually talkative, discussing the visit from the banker and what it might mean for their futures. Miss Lydia's been fighting to hold on since Mr. Valentin passed, Miguel said, mending a bridle by lantern light. But the banker, Townsend, he wants this land, has for years. Now he sees his chance. Why is he so set on this particular ranch? Wyatt asked. Thomas, who had been quiet until then, looked up from the knife he was sharpening. Railroads coming through. Not announced yet, but my cousin works for the surveyor. They're planning a line that'll pass just north of Circle V land. Any property along that route will be worth 10 times what it is now. Wyatt absorbed this information, understanding now why the bank was so eager to claim the north section. It wasn't about grazing land or water rights, it was about the fortune to be made when the railroad arrived. Does Miss Valentin know? Miguel shook his head. I don't think so. Few people do. Townsend and his friends have been buying up land quietly. They don't want prices to rise before they get what they want. Seems like something she ought to know, Wyatt said, thinking of how this information might change Lydia's options. Would it help? Hank asked. She still can't pay what she owes, and Townsend won't extend the loan now that he sees a way to get the land. Wyatt didn't respond, but his mind was working through possibilities. The banker's scheme wasn't illegal exactly, but it was underhanded, taking advantage of a widow's vulnerable position to acquire land that would soon skyrocket in value. The next morning, Wyatt sought out Lydia. He found her in the small office attached to the main house, poring over ledgers with a furrowed brow. She looked up when he knocked on the open door, her expression a mixture of weariness and determination. Mr. Xanders, what can I do for you? I was wondering if you'd thought about my offer. She sighed, setting down her pencil. I have, and while I appreciate it, I can't accept. This is my burden to bear, not yours. I understand pride, Miss Valentin, but sometimes accepting help is the smart play. He hesitated, then decided to share what he'd learned. Especially when you're not getting the full story from folks like Townsend. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? There's talk the railroad's planning a line through the northern part of your property. That's why Townsend is so set on getting that particular piece of land. Once the railroad comes through, that section will be worth a fortune. Surprise, then understanding, and finally anger flashed across Lydia's face. How do you know this? Thomas heard it from his cousin who works with the surveyors. It's not common knowledge yet, but the plans are in motion. Lydia stood abruptly, pacing the small office. That explains so much. The sudden pressure on the loan, the specific interest in the north section. She stopped, facing Wyatt. But it doesn't change my situation. I still can't pay what's owed. No, but it gives you leverage. Knowledge is power, Miss Valentin. She considered this, then looked at him with new interest. You're not just a drifting ranch hand, are you, Mr. Xanders? There's more to you than that. Wyatt shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. I've been around, seen how the world works. And yet you're here, offering to help a struggling ranch you have no connection to. She studied him intently. Why? It was a fair question, one Wyatt wasn't entirely sure how to answer. There was something about Lydia Valentin and her determination to hold on to what she loved that resonated with him. Maybe because he'd spent so long running from his past, never allowing himself to put down roots or fight for anything. Let's just say I don't like seeing good people pushed around by men like Townsend, he replied eventually. Lydia seemed to accept this, though her gaze remained thoughtful. If what you say about the railroad is true, I might have options I didn't realize, but I'll still need to buy time. That's where my offer comes in. Let me help with the immediate payment. We can work out terms that make sense for both of us. She was silent for a long moment, weighing his words. I need to think about this. It's not a decision to make hastily, of course, but time is short. As Wyatt turned to leave, Lydia called after him. Mr. Xanders, thank you for the information and for the offer. It's more than most would do. He nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. If she knew the truth about him, about the things he'd done, and the people looking for him, she wouldn't be thanking him. The next few days were tense. Wyatt continued his regular duties around the ranch, but he could feel Lydia watching him with new interest. She was reassessing him, trying to understand why a drifting cowboy would offer substantial financial help to a virtual stranger. He couldn't blame her for the suspicion in her position. He'd be wary too. On the fourth day after the banker's visit, Lydia found Wyatt as he was finishing repairs on the corral fence. If I were to accept your help, she said without preamble, what exactly would you want in return? Wyatt set down his hammer, giving her his full attention. A small percentage of the ranch, say 10%, and a permanent position here if things work out. That's all. Most men would ask for much more given my situation. I'm not most men, Wyatt replied simply. Lydia studied him, her expression unreadable. No, I don't believe you are. She took a deep breath. Very well. I accept your offer on those terms, but I want everything in writing and I want to know where this money is coming from. Wyatt hesitated. He couldn't tell her the whole truth, but he wouldn't outright lie either. I've been saving for years. Kept it hidden for emergencies. This qualifies. She didn't look entirely satisfied with his answer, but she nodded. We'll ride into town tomorrow to see the lawyer. He can draw up the papers and witness the agreement. That's fine by me. As Lydia turned to leave, she paused. Mr. Xanders. Wyatt, I'm not in the habit of accepting help, especially from someone I barely know, but I'm grateful. Don't thank me yet, he replied. Let's see how this plays out first. The next day they rode into Tucson together. The lawyer, A bespectacled man named Jenkins seemed surprised by their arrangement but drew up the papers efficiently. Wyatt provided the money, nearly all he had from his last job, and in return received a 10% stake in the Circle V ranch and an official position as foreman. As they left the lawyer's office, Lydia suggested they stop for lunch before heading to the bank to make the payment. They found a small cafe near the town square, settling at a table by the window. "So, Foreman Xanders," Lydia said after they'd ordered, "now that we're partners of a sort, perhaps it's time we got to know each other better." Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. Getting to know people meant sharing his past, and that was dangerous territory. Not much to tell. "I've worked ranches across the territories, picked up skills along the way, and family. Anyone waiting for you somewhere," he shook his head. "No family, not anymore." It was the truth, though simpler than the full story. "I'm sorry to hear that. It can be a lonely life without family." Her expression softened with genuine sympathy. "What about you?" Wyatt asked, eager to shift the conversation away from himself. "You mentioned your husband, but what about other family?" "My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my aunt in Santa Fe. I met James when he came through with a cattle drive. He was working as a trail boss then, saving to buy his own ranch." A gentle smile touched her lips at the memory. "He was so full of dreams and determination. When he asked me to marry him and help build something from nothing, I couldn't say no." "You loved him very much," Wyatt observed. "I did. We had 10 good years together, not enough, but I'm grateful for every day." She looked up at him, her hazel eyes direct. "What about you? Ever been married?" "No." Wyatt's response was perhaps too quick. "Never stayed in one place long enough to consider it." Lydia studied him over her coffee cup. "And now, you've just tied yourself to the Circle V. Does that mean you're finally ready to stop running?" The question hit too close to home, making Wyatt tense. "What makes you think I'm running from something?" "Experience. Observation." Her gaze was steady. "The way you always sit with your back to the wall and your eyes on the door, how you give different versions of your background to different people. The fact that you have enough cash hidden away to help a struggling ranch, but you've been working as a hand for $30 a month." Wyatt's hand instinctively moved closer to his gun, a motion he immediately regretted when he saw Lydia notice. "If you've got concerns about our arrangement, I didn't say that." She reached across the table, briefly touching his arm the first time she'd initiated contact between them. "Whatever you're running from, it's your business. You've helped me when I needed it most, and I won't forget that. I'm just saying, maybe the Circle V could be more than just an investment for you. Maybe it could be a fresh start." Before Wyatt could respond, the cafe door opened and 2 men entered. They were strangers to him, but something about their bearing, the way they scanned the room, their hands resting too casually near their weapons, set off warning bells. "We should go," he said quietly, already calculating the distance to the back door. "Need to get to the bank before it closes." Lydia glanced at the newcomers, then back at Wyatt, clearly noting his sudden tension. "Of course," she agreed, allowing him to pay their bill and lead her out through the kitchen, avoiding the front entrance. Outside, Wyatt kept Lydia close as they moved through the back alleys toward the bank. Only when they were safely inside the imposing stone building did he relax slightly. "Friends of yours?" Lydia asked dryly as they waited to see the banker. "Hardly." Wyatt kept his voice low. "Just people I'd rather avoid." She studied him, clearly understanding more than he was saying. "It seems your past is more complicated than you've let on." Before he could respond, they were called into Townsend's office. The banker's face showed poorly concealed surprise and disappointment when Lydia presented the full amount owed. His attempts to pressure her into selling the north section anyway were met with calm refusal. "The debt is paid, Mr. Townsend," she said firmly. "The Circle V remains intact under my ownership." As they left the bank, Wyatt kept a watchful eye for the men he'd seen earlier, but they seemed to have moved on. Still, he knew it was only a matter of time before someone recognized him. The bounty on his head wasn't something bounty hunters would easily give up on. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the Circle V, Lydia finally broke the silence. "Thank you, Wyatt, not just for the money, but for the information about the railroad. I wouldn't have known to fight so hard for that particular piece of land otherwise." "You'd have figured it out eventually," he replied. "You're smarter than Townsend gives you credit for." She smiled at that, her face lighting up in a way that made something twist in Wyatt's chest. "That's the nicest thing you've said to me." "Don't get used to it," he said, but found himself smiling back. That evening, Lydia invited Wyatt to dinner at the main house, a formal acknowledgement of his new position as foreman and partner in the ranch. The meal was simple but well prepared, and afterward they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "I've been thinking," Lydia said after a comfortable silence. "With the railroad coming, we have an opportunity. If we can hold out until then, the value of the ranch will increase substantially. We could expand, maybe even add more water sources for the southern pastures." "You're already planning that far ahead?" Wyatt asked, surprised by her optimism. "Of course. James always said a ranch isn't built in a day or even a year. It's a long game." She turned to face him. "I hope you'll still be here to see it." The simple statement carried weight. Wyatt knew he should be planning his next move, his next escape, but the thought of leaving the Circle V, of leaving Lydia, was increasingly difficult to contemplate. "I'd like that," he admitted. "But my past has a way of catching up to me. Might not be my choice to make." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "This past you're running from, is it something that can be fixed, made right somehow?" Wyatt had asked himself that question countless times. "Some of it maybe, some of it no. There are people who won't rest until they find me, and they're not interested in my side of the story." "And what is your side?" He hesitated, knowing he was standing at a crossroads. He could offer another half-truth, another evasion, or he could trust her with at least part of the reality. Something about Lydia Valentin made the second option increasingly tempting. "I killed a man," he said finally, watching her face carefully for her reaction. 3 years ago in Wyoming. He deserved it. He was robbing a stagecoach, threatening a woman and her child. I was riding guard and I shot him. Turned out he was the son of a judge, a corrupt judge, but one with power. The story got twisted suddenly. I was the robber, and the shooting was cold-blooded murder. There's a bounty on my head in Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico." Lydia absorbed this, her expression thoughtful rather than frightened or disgusted. "And you've been running ever since, changing names, keeping moving, never staying anywhere long enough for someone to recognize me from the posters or send word back to Wyoming." He looked away. "Not the life I would have chosen. But now you've put down a stake here," she observed. "Tied yourself to the Circle V. Why?" It was the question Wyatt had been asking himself since making the offer. Why risk staying? Why invest everything he had in this place, in this woman's dream? "Maybe I'm tired of running," he said eventually. "Or maybe there are some things worth the risk." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that they were both taking chances, both vulnerable in different ways. "Whatever comes," Lydia said quietly, "we'll face it. The Circle V is your home now too. Home." It had been so long since Wyatt had allowed himself to think of any place as home. The word carried a weight of possibility that was both terrifying and exhilarating. In the weeks that followed, Wyatt settled into his role as foreman. Under his direction, the ranch operations became more efficient, and the other hands responded well to his leadership. Miguel, in particular, seemed relieved to have someone sharing the burden of responsibility with Lydia. The threat from Townsend and the bank receded, though Wyatt often caught Peterson or others who worked with the banker watching the ranch from a distance. They were waiting for another opportunity, another weakness to exploit. But with the immediate financial pressure relieved, Lydia was able to focus on preparing the herd for market. Wyatt remained vigilant, always aware that bounty hunters or lawmen might appear. He took to carrying his rifle when riding the perimeter of the property and varied his routines to avoid becoming predictable. But as days turned into weeks, he found himself gradually relaxing, allowing himself to imagine a future at the Circle V. He was also increasingly aware of Lydia, of her strength and intelligence, of the way she hummed softly while working in the garden beside the main house, of how the sun caught in her hair when she rode out to check the herd. They were developing a partnership that went beyond business, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared goals, and something more, though neither of them had put it into words. The cattle drive to market was planned for early October. With a good price, the ranch would be secure for the coming year, with enough left over to begin the improvements Lydia had been planning. Wyatt spent long days preparing, ensuring the herd was healthy and the hands ready for the drive. It was during one of these preparations, as Wyatt was checking supplies in the barn, that Lydia sought him out. She looked troubled, a folded paper clutched in her hand. "This came from town today," she said without preamble, holding out the paper. "Miguel's nephew brought it." Wyatt took it, immediately recognizing the stark black printing of a wanted poster. His own face stared back at him, alongside the name William Turner, one of his aliases, and the details of his alleged crimes in Wyoming. The reward had been increased to $500, a substantial sum that would certainly attract attention. "Someone's been asking about me in town," he said grimly, folding the poster and tucking it inside his shirt. "Probably the men we saw at the cafe. What will you do?" Lydia asked, her voice steady despite the concern evident in her eyes. Wyatt's instinct was to run to collect his things and be gone before anyone could connect Wyatt Xanders with William Turner. But that would mean abandoning the Circle V, abandoning Lydia. The thought was surprisingly painful. "I don't know," he admitted. "Staying puts you and the ranch at risk, but leaving is not what either of us wants," Lydia finished for him. She stepped closer, her gaze direct. "You've helped build something here, Wyatt. This is your home now, too." "Lydia, if they find me here, they won't just take me. They'll take everything, the money I invested, my share of the ranch. They could even try to seize the whole property as criminal proceeds. Let them try." There was steel in her voice. "This is Arizona territory, not Wyoming. We have friends here and the law works differently." Wyatt shook his head, touched by her loyalty but knowing the reality they faced. "It's not that simple. The judge who's after me has connections everywhere. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." "Then we fight," Lydia said firmly. "Not by running, but by clearing your name. There must be witnesses to what really happened in Wyoming, people who saw the truth." It was something Wyatt had considered in the early days of his flight, but the fear and urgency of escaping had overwhelmed any thought of fighting back. And as time passed, the possibility had seemed increasingly remote. "Maybe," he said, not wanting to dismiss her hope entirely, "but it's been 3 years. Witnesses move on, memories fade, evidence disappears." "But not everyone forgets," she insisted. "Not if it was significant enough. The stagecoach company would have records. Passengers might have written accounts. There must be something we can use." Her use of "we" wasn't lost on Wyatt. In the midst of this new danger, Lydia was aligning herself with him, making his fight her own. The realization was both heartwarming and terrifying. "I can't ask you to take this on," he said. "You have enough to worry about with the ranch. You're not asking, I'm offering." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Wyatt, you stepped in when I needed help most. Let me do the same for you." Her touch was warm, her fingers calloused from ranch work but still unmistakably feminine. Wyatt found himself holding on, drawing strength from the connection. "It's dangerous," he warned. "So is life," she replied with a small smile. "I lost James to pneumonia after he survived 15 years of ranch life, rustlers, and stampedes. Danger comes in many forms, and it finds you whether you're looking for it or not. The question is whether you face it alone or with someone beside you." In that moment, with Lydia's hand in his and her unwavering gaze meeting his own, Wyatt felt something shift inside him. The walls he'd built around himself over years of running began to crack, letting in a warmth he'd almost forgotten existed. "I don't know what I did to deserve someone like you in my corner," he said quietly. "You showed up when I needed you," Lydia replied simply. "And you stayed when it would have been easier to run. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man you are." Before Wyatt could respond, they heard Miguel calling from outside. Reluctantly, they separated, the moment broken but something new established between them. "We'll figure this out," Lydia promised as they headed toward the barn door. "Together." The cattle drive proceeded as planned, despite Wyatt's concerns about being recognized on the trail or in the market town. He took precautions, growing out his beard, wearing his hat low, and sending Miguel or Thomas into town for supplies when possible. The herd brought a good price, better than Lydia had hoped, providing the financial security the ranch needed. Upon their return to the Circle V, Wyatt and Lydia began the careful work of investigating his past. Lydia wrote letters to contacts in Wyoming, former business associates of her husband, who might provide information discreetly. Wyatt, despite his reservations, reached out to a former colleague from his stagecoach days who had moved to California, a man who had been sympathetic when the trouble first began. Weeks passed with little progress. The winter of 1878 set in, milder than the previous year, but still bringing shorter days and cold nights. The ranch settled into its winter routine, repairing equipment, caring for the reduced herd, and preparing for spring breeding. Wyatt and Lydia's relationship deepened during these quieter months. They spent evenings planning ranch improvements, discussing books Lydia had in her small library, or simply sitting by the fire in comfortable silence. They were partners in the truest sense, sharing responsibilities and dreams for the future of the Circle V. It was during one such evening, as a rare winter rain pattered against the windows of the main house, that Wyatt finally gave voice to what had been growing between them. "I never expected to find this," he said, watching Lydia as she mended a shirt by the fire. "A place to belong, someone to—" he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. Lydia looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Someone to what?" she prompted gently. "Someone to care about." "Someone who cares about me." Wyatt set aside the ledger he'd been reviewing and moved to kneel beside her chair. "Lydia, I know my situation makes everything complicated. I know I'm asking you to take on a burden you didn't sign up for, but I need you to know how I feel." She set down her mending, her hands trembling slightly. "And how is that?" "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day I saw you in the saloon, standing up to Peterson with your head held high. You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known, and being with you these past months has changed me." Tears glistened in Lydia's eyes, but she was smiling. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever say it." She reached out, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I love you too, Wyatt Xanders, past and all." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I want to build a life with you, a real life, not one based on running or hiding, but I can't do that with this shadow hanging over us." "Then we'll step out of the shadow," Lydia said with the conviction that had drawn him to her from the start. "One way or another, we'll find a way to clear your name." The kiss that followed was both a promise and a declaration, tender at first, then deepening with the passion they'd held in check for so long. When they finally parted, breathless, Wyatt knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in late February. A letter arrived from California, addressed to Wyatt in care of the Circle V. His friend from the stagecoach company had tracked down one of the passengers from that fateful day, a Boston businessman, who had written a detailed account of the robbery attempt and shooting in his journal. The man was now living in San Francisco and had expressed willingness to provide a sworn statement about what he had witnessed. "This could be it," Lydia said excitedly as they read the letter together. "A respectable witness with no connection to you or the judge. Someone whose word would carry weight." Wyatt felt hope stir, though he tempered it with caution. "It's a start, but we'd need more than one witness to counter the judge's influence." "Then we'll find more," Lydia insisted. "Your friend mentions the woman and child you saved. They must remember what happened, and there would have been other guards, a driver, maybe other passengers." The search intensified over the following weeks. Lydia's contacts provided names and possible locations of others who had been present that day. Letters were sent, inquiries made through trusted intermediaries. Slowly, pieces began to come together: a statement from the stage driver now working in Oregon, a letter from the woman whose life Wyatt had saved, records from the stagecoach company showing the official report of the incident. As spring arrived, bringing new life to the Circle V's pastures, Wyatt and Lydia assembled their evidence. With the help of Jenkins, the lawyer in Tucson, they prepared a formal petition for the territorial governor, requesting a review of the Wyoming charges based on the new witness statements and evidence. "It's a risk," Jenkins warned them when they met in his office. "Bringing attention to Wyatt's presence here could attract bounty hunters or lawmen before the petition is reviewed, and there's no guarantee the governor will intervene in a matter from another territory." "We understand the risks," Lydia replied, her hand finding Wyatt's. "But living in the shadows is no life at all. We need to face this directly." Jenkins nodded, admiration evident in his expression. "Very well. I'll send the petition by secure courier to Santa Fe. With luck, we'll have a response within a month." The waiting was the hardest part. Wyatt threw himself into ranch work, pushing to complete spring repairs and preparation for the new calving season. Lydia focused on improving the main house and planning for the future, a future she was determined they would share freely. Their relationship deepened during this time of uncertainty. They were careful to maintain propriety. Wyatt continued to live in the foreman's cabin rather than the main house, but no one at the Circle V doubted that they were a couple in all but name. Miguel and the other hands accepted the change with quiet approval, seeing how their partnership strengthened both the ranch and each other. It was a clear April morning when riders approached the Circle V, 3 men, moving with purpose. Wyatt spotted them from the corral where he was breaking a new horse. His hand moved instinctively to his gun as he signaled to Thomas, who was working nearby. "Get Miss Lydia," he said quietly, "and tell Miguel to be ready." As Thomas hurried toward the main house, Wyatt moved to meet the approaching riders. He recognized none of them, but their bearing suggested law enforcement rather than bounty hunters' small comfort given his situation. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" He called out as they approached, his voice calm despite the tension coiling inside him. The lead rider, an older man with silver hair and a weathered face, reined in his horse. "We're looking for Wyatt Xanders. You found him." Wyatt kept his hands visible but ready. "What can I do for you?" The man studied him thoughtfully. "My name is Marshal Robert Harrington. I'm with the Territorial Marshal's office in Santa Fe." He reached slowly into his coat, producing an official-looking document. "I have a letter here from Governor Axtell regarding your petition." Wyatt's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "I see. And what does the governor have to say?" Before the marshal could answer, Lydia emerged from the house, hurrying toward them with Thomas close behind. She reached Wyatt's side, her presence a steadying force. "Marshal," she acknowledged with a nod. "I'm Lydia Valentin, co-owner of this ranch with Mr. Xanders. Whatever business you have with him concerns me as well." Marshal Harrington tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, as I was about to explain to Mr. Xanders, I've been instructed to deliver this response to your petition." He extended the document. Wyatt took it, breaking the official seal with steady hands. Lydia leaned close as he unfolded the paper, both of them reading the formal language with growing disbelief. "Is this real?" Wyatt asked, looking up at the marshal. Harrington nodded. "Governor Axtell reviewed your evidence personally. The testimonies you gathered were compelling, particularly coming from such reputable sources. He's officially requested that Wyoming drop all charges against you. In the meantime, he's granted you amnesty within New Mexico and Arizona territories. It's over." Lydia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Just like that?" "Not entirely," the marshal cautioned. "Wyoming could fight this, though it's unlikely given the evidence and the passage of time. Judge Turner, the father of the man who was killed, has lost much of his influence due to corruption charges. But I'd recommend staying within the territories where amnesty has been granted, at least for now." "That won't be a problem," Wyatt said, his arm slipping around Lydia's waist. "We have everything we need right here." After the marshal and his men departed, declining their offer of a meal, but accepting canteens of fresh water for their journey, Wyatt and Lydia stood together on the porch of the main house, the document clutched in Wyatt's hand like a talisman. "I can hardly believe it," he said, still stunned by the sudden resolution. 3 years of running, and now you're free," Lydia finished, turning to face him. "Free to build a life without looking over your shoulder, free to be Wyatt Xanders openly." The reality of it was overwhelming. For so long, Wyatt had lived with the certainty that his past would eventually catch up to him, that whatever happiness he found would be temporary. The possibility of a future, a real future with Lydia and the Circle V, was almost too much to comprehend. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, taking her hands in his. "Something I've wanted to ask since that night by the fire, but couldn't not while this was hanging over us." Lydia's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Wyatt, Lydia Valentin," he continued, dropping to one knee before her. "You took a chance on a drifter with a past he couldn't tell. You said then, 'Let me learn it slowly.' And you did piece by piece. You learned the truth of me, and you stood by me through all of it. I love you more than I ever thought possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, with all my heart." Their kiss was witnessed by Miguel and the other hands who had gathered at a respectful distance. A cheer went up, startling both Wyatt and Lydia, who turned to see their small ranch family celebrating with genuine joy. "Took you long enough, boss," Miguel called out, grinning broadly. "We've been waiting months for this." Laughter and congratulations followed, the Circle V transformed by the promise of new beginnings. As the sun set over the ranch they had fought so hard to save, Wyatt held Lydia close, marveling at how his life had changed in less than a year. "I never thought I'd find home again," he murmured against her hair. "Never thought I'd find you." "Sometimes the best things find us when we're not looking," Lydia replied, her eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight. "When we're just trying to survive one more day." "I'm done with just surviving," Wyatt said, his voice firm with conviction. "From now on, we live fully and without fear." The wedding took place in June of 1879, a simple but joyful affair held on the Circle V land that had brought them together. Lydia wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved all these years with wildflowers in her hair. Wyatt, clean-shaven and dressed in new clothes, waited for her beneath an arch of twisted branches and desert blooms, his heart full to bursting. Friends from neighboring ranches and Tucson attended, along with a few of Lydia's relatives who had traveled from Santa Fe. Even Marshal Harrington made an appearance, bringing news that Wyoming had officially dropped all charges against Wyatt, closing that chapter of his life completely. As they exchanged vows before the small gathering, Wyatt found himself reflecting on the journey that had led him to this moment. From a desperate fugitive to a man with a home, a purpose, and a woman who loved him despite, or perhaps because of the struggles they had faced together. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," he told Lydia, his voice carrying clear in the desert air. "To build our dreams together, to face our challenges together, and to love you more each day than the day before." "And I promise to always see you for who you truly are," Lydia replied, her eyes shining with tears and love. "To be your partner in all things, to create a home where both of us can be fully ourselves, and to love you without reservation or condition." The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. As Wyatt held his bride close during their first dance as husband and wife, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed. "Happy, Mrs. Xanders?" he asked, still getting used to the sound of her new name. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Lydia replied, her smile lighting up her whole face. "And you, Mr. Xanders, any regrets about putting down roots?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he said, drawing her closer. "But we have a lifetime ahead of us to make up for lost time." The years that followed were everything they had hoped for and more. The Circle V prospered under their joint management, expanding as the railroad indeed came through the Northern Territory in 1880, bringing new opportunities and connections to markets farther east. They built a larger home to accommodate their growing family twins, a boy and girl born in the spring of 1881, followed by another son 2 years later. The children grew up knowing the value of hard work, the importance of honesty, and the power of standing together through difficult times. Wyatt never entirely lost the habit of vigilance, of keeping an eye on strangers and maintaining a certain readiness for trouble. But it became less a matter of fear and more a way of protecting what he loved: his family, his home, the life he and Lydia had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Lydia took Wyatt's hand, her fingers intertwining with his as naturally as breathing. "You ever think about how close we came to missing all this?" she asked. "If you hadn't ridden into Tucson that day, if I hadn't been at the saloon at that exact moment, or if you hadn't been stubborn enough to keep fighting for the ranch," Wyatt added with a smile, "or if I hadn't been desperate enough to offer help to a stranger." "Life turns on such small moments," Lydia mused, "but I think, somehow, we would have found each other, Some things are just meant to be. Wyatt wasn't sure he believed in fate or destiny. He'd seen too much of life's randomness and cruelty for that. But looking at Lydia, at the home and family they had created together, he could almost believe that some forces in the universe worked toward connection rather than separation, toward healing rather than harm. "You know," he said, watching their oldest son teach his younger brother to rope a practice post, "when I first rode in, I was just looking for a place to hide for a while. I never imagined finding a place to belong. And I was just trying to hold onto what James and I had built," Lydia replied. "I never expected to find a new dream, a bigger one." The sun was setting over the Circle V, painting the desert in gold and crimson, the same colors that had welcomed Wyatt on his first evening at the ranch. But now, instead of a drifter with nothing but his name and his secrets, he was a man with roots deep in this land, with a family who knew him completely and loved him anyway. "I love you, Lydia Xanders," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he spoke them. "Thank you for learning me slowly." She leaned against him, her head finding its familiar place on his shoulder. "I love you too, Wyatt Xanders. Thank you for being worth the learning." As darkness fell, and the first stars appeared in the vastness above them, they remained on the porch, content in the life they had built together, a life founded on trust, perseverance, and the courage to believe in second chances. The past that had once threatened to destroy everything had become simply part of their story, one chapter in the ongoing tale of the Circle V and the family who called it home.